At my own 60th birthday dinner, my son stood up. He announced to all our friends that his wife was pregnant. Then he made a second announcement. It was one he had never discussed with me, that I, his retiring CEO mother, would be their new full-time live-in nanny. He thought he had just planned out my entire retirement for me. He didn't know I had my own plans. Before I begin, thank you for being here, for being part of this community. If you believe in the power of a woman finding her voice and reclaiming her dignity, you are in the right place. Please let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It means the world to me. Now, let me tell you what they did to me. My name is Tiffany Maxwell. And on the eve of my 60th birthday, I stood at the precipice of my own hard-won freedom. For 30 years, my life had been a testament to the relentless, unforgiving pace of ambition. As the founder and CEO of Maxwell Marketing, one of the most respected firms in Washington, D.C., I had built an empire from the ground up. One sleepless night, one killer presentation, one hard-won contract at a time. I had done it all while raising my son Damian as a single mother. A balancing act, so precarious it still made my heart ache to remember it. My life was a monument to my own resilience. But I was tired. I was tired of the board meetings, of the quarterly reports, of the constant grinding pressure to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than the competition. I had achieved everything I had ever set out to achieve, and now I was ready for my reward. For the past 5 years, I had been meticulously planning my final chapter. It was a secret I held close to my heart, a private, beautiful dream that had sustained me through the longest nights and the most difficult deals. My plan was simple. On my 60th birthday, I would announce my retirement. I had a final standing offer from a large private equity firm to buy my company for a life-altering sum. And with the proceeds, I would disappear. I would sell my stylish but sterile Georgetown townhouse, leave the cutthroat world of DC behind, and move to a beautiful, sun-drenched villa I had already picked out in Montego Bay, Jamaica. My retirement was not going to be a quiet fading into grandmotherly obscurity. It was going to be a vibrant, joyful, and utterly selfish celebration of my own life, a life of turquoise water, of warm sand, of reading books on a veranda with a rum punch in my hand, a life that was entirely, unequivocally my own. I had told no one, not my friends, not my colleagues, and certainly not my son Damian or his wife Tiffany. I wanted it to be a grand surprise. A final triumphant announcement at the elegant birthday dinner I was hosting for myself at a private room in one of the city's finest restaurants. My relationship with Damian, now 35, was complicated. I loved him with the fierce, protective love of a mother who had raised her child alone. I had given him everything: the best schools, a debt-free college education, the down payment on his first home, a generous salary for a vaguely defined consulting role at my company. I had cushioned his entire life from the harsh realities of the world. And in doing so, I was beginning to fear, created a man of profound and unshakable entitlement. He and his wife, Tiffany, a woman whose primary career seemed to be curating a perfect aspirational life on social media, saw me not as Tiffany Maxwell, the formidable CEO, but as mom, their personal, inexhaustible resource. Their lives were a testament to my success, a success they seemed to believe was their own birthright. They lived in a beautiful home I had helped them buy, drove cars I had helped them lease, and took vacations I had often quietly funded. Their sense of ownership over my life had grown more audacious over the past year. Last month, I had returned from a business trip to find my guest room completely redecorated. Tiffany had, without asking, replaced my warm, traditional furniture with cold, minimalist pieces. "It's an upgrade, Victoria," she chirped, her smile never reaching her eyes. "It was so dated. This is much more on brand for us." It was my house, but it had to fit their brand. 2 weeks ago, Damian had borrowed my new Mercedes for a weekend trip to the Hamptons with his friends. He hadn't asked. He had simply taken the keys from the hook by the door. He returned it on Sunday night with a new deep scratch along the passenger side door and a casual, unapologetic, "Oops, guess I got a little too close to a hedge." They saw my impending retirement not as my liberation, but as their opportunity. "It will be so wonderful to have you around more, Mom," Damian had said to me recently. his voice full of that same casual, unthinking selfishness. "You'll finally have time to help us with the house, with the garden." Tiffany gets so overwhelmed. I had just smiled, a small, tight smile, my secret dream of Jamaica, a warm, delicious promise in my heart. They had no idea. They saw my future as an extension of their own needs, my time as a resource to be allocated for their convenience. They saw me as a mother, a grandmother in waiting, a role I loved, but one that was not and would never be the sum total of my existence. Tonight, at my birthday dinner, I would finally, lovingly correct their assumptions. I would stand before my friends, my family, and I would announce the sale of my company and the beginning of my new, beautiful life in the sun. It was to be my final, triumphant act as the CEO of my own life, a declaration of my independence. I had no idea that my son was about to attempt the most audacious, most hostile takeover of all, the takeover of my entire future. The private dining room at the Lafayette was a picture of understated elegance. The table was set with crisp white linens, gleaming silverware, and a magnificent centerpiece of my favorite white orchids. My friends, my colleagues, my family, the people who had been the cornerstones of my life were all there, their faces warm and smiling in the soft, flattering candlelight. I looked around the room at the faces of the people I had built my life with. My lawyer, Evelyn, was there, as was my oldest friend from college, Janice. The board members of my company, men and women I had battled with and triumphed alongside for decades, were all present. My heart was full of a deep, quiet joy. This was the perfect setting, the perfect moment to announce the beginning of my new life. I had the speech rehearsed in my mind. It was a speech of gratitude, of reflection, of a well-earned rest. I would thank my team, my friends, my family. And then with a joyful flourish, I would reveal my secret, the sale of Maxwell Marketing and my imminent departure for a life of sunshine and peace in Montego Bay. I could almost taste the rum punch, feel the warm Caribbean sun on my face, but I never got the chance. Just as the waiters were clearing our plates, my son, Damian, stood up, tapping his glass with a spoon for attention. He was beaming, his face alight with an excitement so genuine, so infectious, that the entire room fell into a happy, expectant silence. "If I could have everyone's attention," he began, his voice ringing with a proud, happy confidence. "On this very special occasion, my beautiful wife, Tiffany, and I have a little announcement of our own to make." He reached for Tiffany's hand and she stood beside him, her own face a mask of radiant, blushing joy. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach. "We're pregnant," they announced in unison. The room erupted in a chorus of joyous applause, of whoops and congratulations. I too was on my feet, my own heart swelling with a sudden, unexpected, and profound happiness. A grandchild, a new baby, a new chapter for our family. My own plans, my own announcement could wait. This was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. I hugged them both, my own eyes filling with tears. "Oh, my darlings," I whispered, "that's the most wonderful news in the world. I am so, so happy for you." But then, as the applause began to die down, Damian held up a hand, a wide, magnanimous smile on his face. thank you, everyone," he said. But that's not all. He looked at me, his eyes shining with what I thought was love, with what I thought was a shared familial joy. I had no idea it was the look of a conqueror. "And the best part," he announced to the entire silent room, his voice booming with a triumphant finality, "is that my mother, my wonderful, brilliant mother, is retiring just in time. It's a true blessing. She's going to be our full-time, live-in nanny. We've already started clearing out the guest room for her." The words, so casual, so confident, so utterly, completely devoid of any consultation with me, struck me with the force of a physical blow. The room, which had been so full of warmth and joy just moments before, suddenly felt cold, airless. I stared at him, at my son, my only child, his face still beaming, and I felt a profound, disorienting sense of unreality. A nanny, a full-time, live-in nanny. He had not asked me. He had not discussed it with me. He had simply publicly assigned me a new job, a new life, a new purpose, one that was entirely in service to his own My retirement, my dream of Jamaica, my entire future had just been hijacked, repurposed, and announced to the world as a blessing for them. A second, more scattered round of applause went through the room. This one, a little more confused, a little more hesitant. My friends Evelyn and Janice were looking at me, their smiles frozen, their eyes full of a questioning sympathy. They knew me. They knew my ambition, my independence. They knew this was not my plan. I looked at Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, who was now patting my arm with a condescending, triumphant little smile. "Isn't it perfect, Victoria?" she whispered. "You won't have to be lonely anymore. You'll have a new purpose." My purpose, to be their unpaid servant, to trade my hard-won freedom for a life of diapers and midnight feedings, to exchange my villa in Montego Bay for a guest room in their house. The humiliation was a slow, creeping poison. He had used my own birthday party, a celebration of my life, as a stage to announce the end of it. He had taken my greatest professional achievement, my retirement, and had reframed it as a convenient solution to his childcare problem. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't protest. I was a CEO. I knew better than to show weakness in a hostile negotiation. And this, I now realized, was a hostile takeover of my very life. I just smiled, a cold, tight, and utterly unreadable smile. "Well," I said, my voice a quiet, chilling counterpoint to the cheerful chatter in the room. "That is quite an announcement." He thought he had just secured his future. He had no idea he had just declared war on the one person he should have never, ever underestimated, his mother. The rest of my birthday dinner passed in a surreal, out-of-body haze. I smiled. I accepted the confused congratulations of my friends. I even managed to eat a slice of my own birthday cake, the sweet frosting a cloying, bitter taste in my mouth. I was a performer, an actress in the final, tragic scene of a play I had not written. On the outside, I was the gracious, happy grandmother-to-be. On the inside, my heartbreak was crystallizing, hardening into a cold, diamond-hard fury that they had not just disrespected me. They had tried to colonize my future. They saw my 60 years of life, my decades of hard work, my brilliant career, not as a legacy to be respected, but as a resource to be exploited. My retirement was not my freedom, it was their convenience. My home was not my sanctuary, it was their future nursery. My life was not my own, it was the service they felt entitled to. The drive home was a silent, tense affair. Damian and Tiffany were giddy with their triumph. Their conversation a torrent of baby names and nursery decoration plans. They were so consumed by their own selfish joy that they did not even notice my profound, chilling silence. When I finally arrived at my own empty, quiet townhouse, I did not weep. The time for tears was over. The CEO, the strategist, the woman who had built an empire from nothing was now fully, completely in charge. I went directly to my home office, the command center of my life. I poured myself a small, neat glass of the expensive single malt scotch I reserved for closing major deals. My mind went back to a memory from a decade ago. A brutal, hostile takeover bid from a rival firm, Apex Innovators. I remembered their CEO's sneering arrogance, the certainty that they would swallow my company whole. They had tried to poach my top talent with secret offers and had spread vicious, untrue rumors to my investors. They thought they were sharks, and I was just bait, but they didn't know I'd been tracking their R&D for months. My countermove was not a defense, it was an attack. On the day they launched their bid, I filed a series of preemptive patents that rendered their flagship product, Pipeline, completely obsolete. I didn't just defeat their bid, I crippled their company and acquired their most valuable asset for pennies on the dollar weeks later. I remembered the clean, cold satisfaction of that victory. Tonight, I needed that same surgical precision. My revenge would not be an emotional outburst. That was their game, a game of drama and manufactured crises. My revenge would be a quiet, methodical, and utterly devastating business decision. I opened the top drawer of my desk and took out 2 documents. The 2 documents that represented the beautiful future I had so carefully, so secretly planned for myself. The first was the final offer letter from a large private equity firm that had been trying to acquire my company, Maxwell Marketing, for the past year. It was a staggering multi-million-dollar offer, an offer that represented the culmination of my life's work. I had been holding off on signing it, waiting for the perfect moment, for my birthday announcement. The second document was a glossy brochure, its pages filled with sun-drenched photographs of a magnificent white stucco villa nestled in the hills overlooking Montego Bay, Jamaica. It had a wraparound veranda, an infinity pool, and a garden filled with hibiscus and bougainvillea. It was my dream, my reward, my escape. I looked at the two documents, at the two futures that lay before me, the one they had so arrogantly assigned to me, a future of unpaid servitude in their guest room, and the one I had so carefully, so lovingly planned for myself, a future of peace, of sun, of freedom. There was no choice to be made. There was only an adjustment of the timeline. My original plan had been to announce my retirement, then spend the next few months carefully winding down my company, managing the transition, saying my goodbyes. But their public, humiliating attempt to hijack my life had changed everything. My quiet, graceful exit was no longer an option. It was time for a swift, decisive, and ruthless execution. My heartbreak, the profound, shattering pain of my son's betrayal, was now a cold, clear, and powerful fuel. I had spent my entire life putting his needs, his happiness, his future before my own. I had built my empire for him. I had planned my retirement with his security in mind, and he had repaid me with the ultimate act of disrespect by trying to turn me into his servant. He saw me as a resource. Very well, I would show him what happened when that resource was suddenly, completely, and irrevocably liquidated. The next morning, I did not wake up as a heartbroken mother. I woke up as a CEO with a hostile takeover to execute. The target was not a competing firm. It was my own life, and the hostile bidders, my son and his wife, were about to be subjected to a swift and brutal leveraged buyout. My first call at precisely 8:00 a.m. was to my corporate lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn, who had been with me for 20 years. "Evelyn," I said, my voice calm, clear, and devoid of any emotion. "It's Victoria. I'm accepting the offer from Northgate Equity, the final one. I want to sign the papers by the end of the week. Make it happen." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Victoria? Are you sure? I thought you wanted another 6 months to manage the transition." "The timeline has been accelerated," I replied coolly. "There has been a change in my personal retirement strategy. I want the deal finalized and the funds transferred by Friday at the latest. It is a condition of my acceptance." "Victoria," Evelyn said, her voice now a low, serious murmur. "This is a major move. Are you all right?" "I'm more than all right, Evelyn," I replied, a cold smile in my voice. "I'm in control. They didn't just announce a pregnancy last night. They announced a hostile takeover of my life. We will treat it as such." I heard Evelyn let out a low whistle. "Consider it done, boss," she said, her voice full of a new, dawning respect. She knew me well enough to know that when I used that tone, there was no room for argument. My second call at 8:15 a.m. was to my international real estate agent in Jamaica, a wonderful woman named Simone, who had been patiently holding the villa in Montego Bay for me. "Simone," I said, "it's Victoria Maxwell. We're moving forward on the villa. I'd like to make a full all-cash offer today, contingent on the closing of my company's sale this Friday. Please draw up the paperwork." Her delighted squeal on the other end of the phone was a small, satisfying confirmation that my new life was already in motion. My final moves were to secure my own exit. I booked a one-way first-class ticket to Montego Bay for this coming Saturday. I arranged for a discreet professional moving company to come and pack up my personal belongings, my art, my books, with instructions to place them in a secure long-term storage facility. My Georgetown townhouse, I decided, would be sold later. Handled remotely by a trusted agent, for now, I just needed to disappear. All the while, I continued to play the part of the compliant, slightly overwhelmed grandmother-to-be. When Damian and Tiffany called full of their own plans, I was a model of gentle acquiescence. I had to endure an afternoon with Tiffany looking at nursery paint swatches on her tablet. She held up 2 shades of beige that were virtually identical. "Which one do you think, Victoria? Oat milk or heirloom linen?" she'd asked. "They're both lovely, dear," I'd replied with a serene smile, while on my own phone, under the table, I was approving the final wire transfer for my multi-million-dollar Jamaican villa. "And Mom," Damian had added on another call, We need to start thinking about the schedule. Tiffany and I both have demanding careers, so your hours will need to be flexible. We're thinking you'll handle all the night feedings for the first 6 months, of course. It'll be a huge help. Of course, son, I'd said, my voice as smooth as silk as I was confirming my first-class flight details. Whatever you need. They were so consumed by their own entitlement, so blinded by their own arrogance that they could not see the quiet, devastating storm that was gathering just over the horizon. They heard my compliance, but they did not hear the cold, steely resolve beneath it. They saw my quiet smiles, but they did not see the glint of a CEO about to execute the most successful and most personal exit strategy of her entire career. They thought they were planning my future. They had no idea I was already living in it. The deal for my company was finalized on Thursday. The funds were transferred on Friday morning. The deed to my Jamaican villa was signed, sealed, and delivered by noon. My one-way ticket was confirmed. All the pieces were in place. That evening, they called a family meeting at my townhouse. They arrived with a binder, a schedule, a list of their expectations for their new, full-time, unpaid nanny. They were about to be very, very disappointed. The meeting was indeed going to happen, but it was going to be on my terms, and I was the one with the agenda. Family meeting was held in my living room, the same room where just a week prior, my life had been so casually and so publicly hijacked. Damian and Tiffany sat opposite me on my white linen sofa, a thick 3-ring binder resting on the coffee table between us. It was white, minimalist, and embossed with the words, Project Grandparent of Framework for Success. They had the smug, self-satisfied air of two executives about to present a new, brilliant, and non-negotiable business plan. All right, Mom, Damian began, tapping the binder with a proprietary air. Tiffany and I have put together a little schedule, a framework for your new role, just to make sure we're all on the same page. He opened it to the first tab, labeled Nanny Onboarding. We've outlined the feeding schedule, the nap times, the approved list of developmental activities. It's all very straightforward. We've even included a list of pre-approved grandma names. We're leaning toward VV as it polls better on Tiffany's social media, but we can circle back on that. Tiffany chimed in, her voice full of a condescending sweetness. And we've also included a list of household duties, Victoria, she said, flipping to a tab marked Domestic Synergies. Light housekeeping, meal prep for us, grocery shopping, just the basics to keep the house running smoothly while we're focused on our careers and the new baby. Oh, and here she pointed to a subsection is the social media policy. It just outlines the types of photos you're permitted to be in and ensures any of your personal posts align with our family brand. I listened, my face a mask of calm, polite interest as they laid out their plan for my life, a life of unpaid 24/7 servitude. They had turned my retirement into a job description, my love into a list of duties. When they were finally finished, they looked at me, their faces full of an expectant, almost demanding pride. They were waiting for my gratitude, my compliance, my quiet acceptance of my new assigned role. I did not speak immediately. I just looked at them, at these two strange entitled creatures who wore the faces of my son and his wife. And then I held up a hand. A single elegant gesture that silenced their expectant smiles. That is a very comprehensive plan, I said, my voice quiet, but imbued with the cool, calm authority of a CEO about to address her board. And I appreciate the thought you've put into it. But before we discuss your plans for my future, I have some wonderful news of my own to share. They exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible look of annoyance. My news was an unwelcome interruption to their agenda. I leaned forward and placed two documents of my own on the coffee table. The first was a single, crisp, and very official-looking letter. First, I announced, my voice as clear and as steady as a bell. As of this morning, I have officially sold Maxwell Marketing. The deal was finalized yesterday. I am retired. The shock on their faces was immediate and profound. Sold it, Damian stammered, but I thought you were going to transition out over the next year. I thought I was going to take on a larger role. Things changed, I said simply. They were shocked, yes, but also I could see pleased. My retirement was no longer a future event. It was a present reality, which meant in their minds that their full-time nanny was now officially on the clock. And my second piece of news, I continued, my voice never wavering as I slid the second document across the table, is this. It was a plane ticket, a one-way first-class ticket to Montego Bay, Jamaica. With the proceeds from the sale of my company, I explained, my voice as calm and as serene as a Caribbean morning. I have purchased a home in Montego Bay. My one-way flight leaves tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I stood up then, the meeting concluded. I looked at their stunned, horrified faces, at their mouths, which were opening and closing like two gasping fish. Their entire, perfect, carefully laid plan for their future, for their free live-in childcare had just been utterly, completely demolished. A nanny? Damian finally choked out, his voice a pathetic squeak. But we can't afford a nanny. Tiffany just stared at me, her face white with a rage so profound it was silent. You can't just leave, she whispered. We had a plan. No, my dear, I replied, a small cold smile on my lips. You had a plan. I have a plane ticket. I wish you both, I said, the very best of luck with the baby. I then turned and walked out of the room, leaving them there amidst the ruins of their own breathtaking entitlement, with their useless binder of schedules and their now catastrophic pregnancy. The CEO had just executed her final, most successful, and most liberating merger and acquisition. She had acquired her freedom, and she had divested herself of them. The silence that followed my counter-announcement was, I imagine, profound. I did not stay to witness their meltdown. I simply went upstairs to my bedroom, locked the door, and finished packing my last suitcase. The frantic, panicked voices that echoed from the living room below were a distant, satisfying soundtrack to my own quiet, triumphant departure. My flight to Jamaica the next morning was a journey into the light. As the plane ascended, leaving the cold, gray landscape of DC behind, I felt a sense of release so profound it was a physical sensation. A loosening of a knot in my chest I hadn't even realized I had been carrying for years. My new home in Montego Bay was everything I had dreamed of and more. It was a beautiful, airy villa with a veranda that wrapped around the entire house, offering breathtaking views of the turquoise Caribbean Sea. The air was warm, thick with the scent of salt and hibiscus. This was my peace. This was my reward. The first few weeks were a blissful, selfish indulgence. I swam in my infinity pool. I read novels in my hammock. I took long, slow walks on the beach. I was no longer a CEO, no longer a mother in the traditional sense. I was just Victoria, a woman at peace, living a life that was entirely, unequivocally her own. About a month after my arrival, I received an email from my old friend and lawyer, Evelyn. The subject line was simply a little light reading. Attached was a link to a local DC Society gossip column detailing their sudden downsizing. It was a mild curiosity. But 2 months after that, another email arrived from Evelyn, this one with an audio file attached and the subject line, "Thought you should hear this. He called the office. I sat on my veranda, a tall glass of rum punch sweating beside me, and pressed play. It was a voicemail. Damian's voice, but not as I knew it. It was thin, reedy, and cracking with panic. Mom, you have to call me. You have to fix this. The house, the bank is foreclosing. Tiffany, she's gone. She packed her bags last week, said she couldn't live like this. She took the car. How could you do this to us? You ruined everything, our whole life. It's gone. It was all for you, for the baby. You were supposed to help us. You owe us. I looked out at the endless expanse of blue, at the horizon where the sea met the sky. I thought of the little boy I had raised, the one who'd scraped his knee and cried in my arms. Where had he gone? When had he been replaced by this grasping, blaming stranger? I felt a final, fleeting pang, not of love, but of a cold, clinical pity for the man he had failed to become. He hadn't just overestimated my compliance. He had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of my love. It was a wellspring, not a utility to be endlessly tapped. I took a sip of my rum punch. Then, with a steady hand, I forwarded the audio file to a new email address I had created for my son. My one and only reply. My final lesson in self-reliance. You're right, I wrote. I do owe you. I owed you a mother who would teach you that actions have consequences. Consider that debt now paid in full. You are a smart man, Damian. You'll figure it out. Then I did something I had been waiting a lifetime to do. I blocked his office number. I blocked his email. I severed the final frayed cords. My revenge was not in their suffering. It was in my own joyous, defiant, and unbreakable freedom. They had tried to write the final chapter of my life for me, a sad little story of servitude and quiet desperation. Instead, I had written my own. And as I sat on my veranda, listening to the gentle rhythm of the waves, I thought about the true meaning of being a CEO. It's not just about building an empire. It's about knowing when to sell, when to divest, and when to start a new venture. And my new venture was my own peace, the most valuable asset of all.